Got
So
it.
thank you so much for joining us, Laurence, today on how to answer challenging interview questions. We're all excited to get your wealth of expertise here. So take it away.
Great. Yeah. So if you don't know me already, I'm Laurence Berry. Been an instructor at Love Circular for about 2 years. And whilst doing that, I've been working at the Government Digital Service. So that's in the public sector. I've been helping other governments develop design teams. But at the same time, I've also been involved in doing interviewing. Also, because of the way career progression works in civil service, I've gone through a number of interviews within the public sector. And now I've left GDS and I'm in a similar position. I'm starting to interview for things as well. I was just mentioning a minute ago, I've started to have a few chats with people in my network that have accidentally become into full-on interview processes. So yeah, we'll discuss some of these challenges that you might come across. So I guess before we start, does anyone have any questions that they came that are on their mind at the moment? Or situations that you're preparing for or have been in? No pressure straight away. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me throughout today if something's interesting, or if you've got questions, just shout out. Let's make it a bit of a casual chat, I suppose. So yeah, Jenny, you sent me over a list of questions that people had back in December. So I've got them up now, so I could start with the first one.
Yes, please do. That'd be great.
It's something that I've been thinking about as well. So a lot of these are quite topical because the design world is kind of at a kind of possible turning point right now. So the first question I had was, what do you think of AI and its possible role in design? I wonder if someone had that question as during one of their interviews. But
Yeah,
I
they
can
had
imagine,
done. They had
oh,
it.
really?
Yeah, all of these are proper questions that people have been asked that they were unsure how to answer.
That's really tough one to answer on the spot if you've been spent your time learning about the design process itself, and it gets a bit existential. I definitely have thoughts on it. Does anyone else have thoughts before I share mine about how AI, things like ChatGPT, are going to impact your role as a designer? Has anyone been thinking about that? I think if you haven't tried using these tools, maybe start to get familiar with them so that you can, this is what I'm trying to do anyway. I'm trying to start using them in my practice to see how they can benefit me. So yeah, what do you think you'd say if you were asked this? I'd probably take a little moment, but I think there's a couple of routes or paths that we might go down in the future in terms of AI. I think it could become just another element of our design toolkit. So just like we've got Figma, maybe we got ChatGPT on the side, or perhaps it's an enhancement for those tools. So in many ways, I also think it will democratize certain aspects of the design process to more people, kind of in the same way that in graphic design, computers and publishing tools democratized graphic design to almost everybody. We can all create documents, we can print things ourselves, but you can really tell when something's been done by a good graphic designer. So it might be the same with AI. As these tools become more accessible for people. I'm just having a quick look at my notes because this is the trickiest question I had. Yeah, like I said, with the toolkit, a lot of our design work is about understanding how to use tools to create a certain outcome. We don't design every font or every color scheme, or we don't take all the pictures that we use in our designs, but we bring them all together to create something that solves a problem. So perhaps I'm hoping that one route we go down is that AI is just a tool. However, that's option one. The second option, I think perhaps AI becomes that curator and starts doing a lot of this work for us. maybe that means that we focus more on the research side and understanding the needs of our users. So it could become a tool that we use, or it could maybe supersede some of our processes. Some of those options are more dystopian than the other. But maybe there's some things for you to consider and talk about when if you're ever asked this in a design interview. I would love to be more coherent with that. My second question.
Can I ask a couple of questions on that? What do you think the reason is for that question being asked?
I think I imagine people want to learn themselves. So I imagine the interviewers might be quite interested in this topic right now. It's really topical. Everybody's got access to this tool, ChatGPT and things like that. I've been playing with one last night called character.ai. I didn't intend to spend my whole evening on it, but I was having some really good conversations with these AIs, and I found it just an interesting experience. So yeah, I think in some ways we're all trying to learn how we can use that in our process.
Helpful, thank you. So they're just wanting to engage different people's opinions just so everybody can learn together. So it's almost like a conversation that could be had rather than giving an answer that's got to be the correct answer. It's just people forming opinions. Yeah,
sometimes we, where I previously worked at GDS, we do ask questions and we want to understand whether people are focused on the latest, coolest thing, like the latest, coolest coding language, or whether they care about fixing the basics. So it gives us an idea of what kind of person they are. So are they an innovator, or are they very practical and they want to fix the groundwork first? And both are good routes to go down. So it depends on what that role is about.
Helpful, thank you.
Cool. Someone also asked about an example. They were asked to give an example of how they would use empathy on a website. And I reflected on this. For me, talking about empathy, or if someone talks about empathy, it's about understanding the needs of your users. So you're probably going to want to talk about in the interview how you understand your users' needs. So does this come from doing your discovery work, your interviews? It comes from actually speaking to people. So I would go down that route and talk about the exercises and activities that you've done to understand the needs of your users, how to understand the problem statements and things like that. If you're not meeting the needs of your users, then you don't have that empathy. So you're less likely to succeed. Your product or your solution is less likely to be the right one because you haven't tested it. So that's quite a simple one for me. Has anyone here had that question, or do you feel confident that you could, if you were asked about empathy, you would know what you'd talk about? Who's got their microphone? Zandy.
I think I'd feel, quite comfortable answering that one, because most of it were based on like the research you've done, and throughout the process you're constantly keeping the user needs in mind. So I think I'd be okay with that one.
Great. Yeah. And that's definitely about understanding the challenges, the needs over like solutions at this point. This ties in nicely to my answer for where I find inspiration. I kind of struggle with inspiration if I'm just staring at my laptop. I have spent a lot of time looking for I don't know, websites that curate all of the best design systems and things like that, but I end up getting overwhelmed and I don't really know where to start with my work. So for me, to answer a question about where I get my inspiration, I tend to focus on the users I'm working with or for and understanding their problems. So it kind of follows on from empathy. Other sources of inspiration for me are meeting people. So other designers, other practitioners, and being part of the community. A lot of organizations that you'll interview for are quite interested in whether you're active in the design community. so this is kind of a nice thing to mention as well. If you follow people on Twitter, things like that, if it gives you ideas or you're learning from them. And finally, I subscribe to a handful of newsletters from organizations that I'm interested in or would like to work for or have worked for. So I'm kind of ambiently getting inspiration through that. But for specific work, my inspiration comes from understanding the user's challenges and problems. It might be worth saying, though, from my perspective, I'm a service designer, which is less on the visual end of design, and it's more on understanding what touch points need to exist. Should there be a website here, an app, or a person? Should there be a call center in this user journey? So that's what I do as a service designer. So that maybe influences my answer here. Does anyone have any places they go online for inspiration? Are there websites that you look at?
I sometimes use Dribble.
Oh,
just
yeah.
to know what other designers are like designing to get inspiration.
Yeah. I think I've got this thing on my desktop. It's a screen. I think it was just some kind of meme. And the first image says the app in Figma, and it looks like Thor from some Marvel film. And then the second image says the app in production, which is kind of like just your average bloke with dad bod with a garden rake standing in an ocean. The idea here is that like the stuff you design or see in Figma looks perfect, and it's worth considering whether that is buildable in reality. What does the minimal viable version of that look like? And the things you see on Dribble are perfect, but can they be delivered in reality? So that might be something you mention when you talk about something like Figma. And you want to show in your interviews that you have that like developer empathy that we've talked about on the Love Circular product design course. So yeah, consider what's realistic, but it's a great place for inspiration. Okay. How would you try and ensure, these are all flowing really perfectly actually. How would you try and ensure handoff goes well? So I made a note for this. For me, I think handoff goes really well. So when you're handing your work off to the developer or the next person in the process, ideally you would be working with those developers collaboratively throughout. So think of them as research participants. So when you're understanding how an existing product or process works, interview them, speak to them about what's possible, and involve them in all of those feedback sessions that you run on your wireframes, so your straw man proposals and things like that. You want to make sure that everybody is involved. And that means by the time you come to handoff, it's not a surprise for them. And they've also been involved in the design of the solution. I think sometimes in some organizations, design is done by the design team, then it's sent over to the development team, which could be in another country. And I think that's quite a suboptimal way to work. And it's not very empowering for the developers as well. So my advice there is you can improve handoff by working closely as a multidisciplinary team. And that's like core to agile ways of working, which you learn about in the first class, I think, of Love Circular. I wonder if, I don't know if we've got the person who asked that question, but what challenges they imagine having with handing off a piece of work.
No, the person isn't part of the session today.
That's okay. I'll assume no one here has submitted these questions. Okay. So the next question was that someone has been asked is, what are the 3 things you would change about a website? This is really broad, especially without seeing a website in front of me. But if I was presented with something, and I have had this in an interview, I've been given a login page and asked to improve it in front of, whilst being watched. I don't think many people run interviews like this anymore, and they're a bit more kind. But they might ask you about your process of how you might approach the redesign of a website. Just like we do in some of the exercises, I would perhaps review it for accessibility. So maybe I could run through it with a screen reader. I could use an automated accessibility checker. That will probably be the most important thing to check to improve the website. Like, does it currently work? I might set some goals. So what are the goals that we want to achieve with this website? And by having those goals, we can measure them through analytics to make sure we can really kind of monitor how well that website is performing against our goals. And perhaps I'll do a usability session to understand the problems. So the accessibility step will flag up some quick fixes that need to be changed. So that gives me a backlog of like quick work to do. Setting goals and analytics is more long-term, and doing usability interviews is maybe kind of mid-term piece of work that I would do to improve a website. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on that answer? Does it feel like a useful answer for you? So I've not necessarily jumped in and said that I would change the color scheme. I would do a rebranding. Whitney, yeah, you got your hand up.
I have a question, but it's on not the website, but more of something else. I just wanted to ask, the recruitment world is like changing and stuff. So it's a case of like, we're no longer working from home as much as we wanted to, and we're going into the office. And with the layoffs happening, like going on, like what tips would you recommend for people who are like looking for jobs, like how to possibly stand out, or when they do get the roles, like things to stay motivated, especially if they're like new in a job and they're remote?
Are you saying that the jobs are going more remote?
No, less remote, as in more, they're inside the office, but I've seen some that are still remote. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a challenge. The job that I just left at GDS it asked for like 2 days in the office a week, which was fine, but I really missed the culture that we had pre-pandemic in the office. And like many of our teams were coming in on different days, or many of our team members were coming on different days. So if you can try and create, like, agree days that you're in the office together, then you build up a bit more of a community. And I think that's really important. Otherwise, you're traveling into an office to sit and do a Zoom call, which is a big challenge. At GDS as well, we opened offices around the country, which kind of created that environment as well. So people might be the only person in Manchester or the only person in London. So it felt almost pointless going into that office. So I think I would consider whether I want to work in that situation. I think my next role, I'd like to be embedded in an office more regularly, or with 100% remote team. But the mix is a bit of a challenge. I haven't worked it out myself. And what you were saying about the changing with the layoffs and things like that, I haven't necessarily seen that affect the amount of roles that are being hired for at the moment. Not in my area, at least in like the public sector. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a standard that services have to meet that are being designed that require you to have designers. I think those changes are at the big tech company level, and they're seeing an opportunity there. This is kind of anecdotal, but I've heard people suggest that maybe the board members are saying, well, Twitter laid off all these designers or all of these people and they're still functioning. why can't we do that and save money? So I think that is what's leading this change at the moment. But I think, yeah, we'll have to wait to see if that trickles down to the rest of our industry. But at the moment, seems like there's still opportunities out there.
Okay. Thanks for
Yeah,
that kind of encouragement.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you just see it left and right. You're just like, do you know what? I think everyone ideally would want to like work in tech, just because, you know, you hear that about the benefits and the pay and all that kind of stuff. But then left, right and center, you just hear these big companies saying they want to lay off people, especially like some on their maternity leave or any like really dire situation. So especially, you're just like wondering.
I think it's very America centric as well. Although I think people who work for companies like Google in London are also having similar news. But what kind of industry do you want to go into?
Ideally, it was to go into like tech. I'm not really. I think with me, I've worked in a different industry, so I'm not really fast. It's just a case of culture fit. Like how the culture kind of sits with me. Is there one? Is like what's the stats on it? Like there's so many questions that I'd have to ask the interviewer, especially as I'm like switching roles again. So that's my kind of thing. I'm not fussed about the industry. It's more like what's the culture like.
Yeah, I think something that can get you ahead, but it's a challenge, and something I'm thinking about at the moment. I just read it from one of these newsletters, actually, from someone I know who's a freelancer. And she was talking about finding her purpose. And the first year that she was freelancing, she didn't have that specific purpose, what she wanted to solve in the world. But over time, she kind of focused on this idea of improving the NHS from a design perspective. And because she was more open about it, she's been sharing her progress on this work and talking about her thoughts and her goals on places like LinkedIn, for example. People have pointed out opportunities to her. So she's now got some good pieces of work coming up in the area she wanted to work in because she was open about it. So yeah, there's something about working in the open or sharing your goals publicly that can help people support you.
Okay, I hear you with that. Yeah.
Can I speak into that as well, Whitney? I think it's so important as a career coach that you really try and identify where you want to work and why, because when you are applying for jobs, it's really important that you're able to communicate why you want to work for that company, why you want to work in that industry. When there's 100 applications and you don't really care, and yet somebody spent the time tailoring it, saying, I love this about your company, I love this product, they're going to be the people that are shortlisted, not you.
Okay.
So I think it's really important that you do spend some time thinking and determining what's right for you. In the careers course, if you go to the job search section, we do have the first module is asking yourself certain questions to find the right fit job for you. So go through that and then book in with me and we can have a conversation about it. Okay. Because I think as you do your case studies as well, it's really important that your case studies align with the type of jobs you want to apply for. I've had students interview for SaaS companies and not got through to the second round because they're giving portfolio and their presentations, they're doing e-commerce, it's just not fitting. So it's important to think about it now so it fits as you move forward. And if you're not sure, well, then do diverse work to keep your options open or apply for agencies. But it is important for you in your future to think about it.
Okay, I will do the module and then book a one-to-one with you. It's way too long. Thank you.
It's a little challenging whenever there's so much interesting work out there or interesting paths you can go down as well.
So can you say that again, please? Sorry, you cut off for a second. I think it's me.
I was just saying, it can feel really challenging to find your purpose in some ways when there's so many options out there.
Because that is such a deep statement.
Yeah, it gets a bit deep, doesn't it? But yeah, it's very helpful, but maybe don't feel that pressure at the start to know exactly what you want to do. But yeah, having an idea of that, the companies that you want to work for is going to be super useful.
Thank you.
There's a question in chat, Laurence.
Oh yes, Amina. Would interviewers ask about examples of good and simple digital UX design or designs that ensure customer centricity? Definitely. I think in my last interview, I had that question and the one before. Often we ask, is there an example of a good interaction or a good app that you've used recently? And can you tell us why? So you've kind of answered some of that. You might talk about something being a good product because it was customer centric. And that might be something that they're interested in hearing. It's also something you should definitely prepare an answer for that, because it can throw you on the spot. So if you're asked, what's your favorite app? What's your favorite product? That's so broad. I think the last time I talked about the experience using my Apple TV, because I'm integrated with the whole Apple ecosystem in a way. But then I was able to talk about how I think that's not necessarily user-centric, because I'm kind of led by business decisions. Because if you don't have an Apple phone, if you don't have iTunes or whatever, an Apple account, then in some cases the TV is unusable, which is a bit ridiculous. So yeah, that's the example that I gave last time. So there was like a pros and cons. Does that answer your question, or have I gone on a bit of a tangent? Great. There was one question, what time frame would you take to complete the task? I'm guessing that's not a question they've been given, but perhaps they've been given a takeaway task. I'm not sure. Do you know the detail around that one, Jenny?
All of these questions came during interviews. So
okay.
I'm guessing it must have been relating to
delivering some work.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we go back to, you might not have done this class yet, but I think it was week 1. One of the things we talk through is like agile ways of working. So this might be something you reference. You might say, I will break the task down into small deliverable pieces of work, and I would plan to deliver these within like a 2-week time frame. So if you remember, agile working is working in kind of usually two-week chunks. So you've planned the work for 2 weeks, and then every 2 weeks you reassess what you need to do on next. So you could reference that when it comes to working out how long it will take to do a task, because it's really difficult to know how long something will take in reality. So that's why we de-risk it by breaking it into small pieces of work. Does anyone else have other methods for working out how long a piece of work might take? I see Zaz in the chat in the room.
Normally what I do, because I work in an agency, if we have like a deployment date or like a live date, just work backwards from then, just to see, because then you can kind of factor in any other SLAs that you have. Like if you know something's going to take like 5 days to approve, or like you need approval from another party, so kind of work backwards to see if you've got enough time. That's really good. So you're considering things that might take time and hold up the work. That's nice. So maybe there's 2 steps. There's like a road mapping, high level roadmap of understanding the whole project, and then maybe bringing in that, like, what can you do in 2 weeks element to that. Cool. Oh, some good examples in the chat as well. Yeah, things always take longer than you think. I'm a great overpromiser, which is probably not reassuring, but maybe that's something I can talk about if they ask that challenging question. What are some of your weak points? Let's move on to the next.
We've already talked about when we incorporate developers in the design process. For me, that's something you would want to engage, you'd want to engage them throughout the design process, where, however, there are those certain points where you bring them in. So for feedback sessions on your wireframes and things like that. So I wouldn't leave it to handover and to surprise the developers with something completely new. And I believe that might be different in different organizations though. So it might be interesting to learn what the organization is like that you're applying for and whether you want to work in that environment as well. There's lots of companies that do their development overseas, and I can't imagine what that's actually like to work in that environment. I think places like BT often do that. So they've got design teams that are not working directly with the developers. So in the end, I feel like that will create more back and forth. But before you have these opinions, maybe look into how the company that you're interviewing for works. And I think this is probably a good critique if they do work in that way. Okay, this is another one that comes up a lot. How would you proceed with the design decisions if I don't have the time to do user research? So you can think of ways to make it work without user research. But that's obviously suboptimal. You're skipping half of your design process. So there's going to be risks. So depending on the level of risk overall, it might be okay to work with some assumptions that you've made. And you might be able to inform these assumptions using research methods like analytics or competitor analysis. So you don't necessarily have to do interviews for absolutely everything. So I don't know if you've got here yet in your design process, but you should use hypotheses to measure whether your assumptions were successful. So if you've made an assumption that making the button red will stop people from clicking it, then you can measure whether over time people stopped clicking it. So there's a way you can do research in the long term to see if your solution was right, and then maybe go and change it if it wasn't. But if it's something really risky, like a government service that has been advertised and everyone's talking about in the news, you probably want to make sure you get that research time, because the risk is too high that you'll launch and people won't be able to use it. And that's not great for accessibility, inclusion, but also if it's a high profile product or service. So think about those. Is it like a red route, a critical path through your product? Or is it something that it's okay if it doesn't really work for everybody? You'll learn from it and you can change it. So that was the first approach. I've got two. So the first approach is work based on assumptions, but be really clear that you're doing so. The second approach is maybe deprioritize other tasks and show the value of research. So if you can promote doing some research, if it's something that's critical, then perhaps it's about prioritization. You prioritize delivering less, but better. But yeah, always bear in mind, not everything needs to be researched to the nth degree. Okay. We've already talked about this one. We've already talked about what digital product we think is good. So I'll skip that. That was the final question. And then I've pulled out a few challenging interview questions that I've come across. So yeah, that first one that always catches me out is, what's your favorite app or experience? I don't use that many apps. I generally don't like interacting with things on my phone. So I've got a negative mindset. So when they ask me for a positive experience, I'm like, oh no. So yeah, have some of those in the back of your mind. Be ready for those questions, like what are your weaknesses, strengths, things like that. Or maybe some tricky questions that might turn your ideas on their head. So for the government fast stream process, people are asked to pitch an idea. They've been given lots of information and they have to decide between two options. I can't remember what these options are, but they're like, should we run a pilot for robots that can look after people who need care? Or should we invest in smart cities so that we can gather data about our citizens and support them? So they have to make a decision on these two routes. Once they've made a decision and presented it, we then say the Prime Minister prefers the second, the other option. Can you pitch that solution to us? So yeah, that's probably the most challenging, most sneaky question you can get. I wouldn't expect to get that in a standard interview. But yeah, be prepared for your ideas to be turned on their head. So can you think of another solution to that? That might freak you out a little bit. Don't overthink it too much. Some places might ask you to do a task, and there's always lots of chat in Slack about tasks. For us, when we do that, we really want to see that you're questioning the brief, to be honest. So yeah, we want to hear about your design process and how you'll solve it. But if we ask you to design a login journey for an app, you should really be questioning what's the user need for a login for an account. Can they not access this without creating an account? Is it a business goal or something the business wants, or is it actually a user need? And we love it when designers kind of question that. So yeah, before anything, go back to the start and think about the user needs and then how you approach it. I think I've got one more thing. Yeah. Another challenge when interviewing is that I found over my career is what to expect at different levels. So an associate or junior level versus mid-level or senior level. And being aware of these can be useful for the interview itself or useful for you to plan ahead. If you've got this goal of getting a senior position, what experience do you need to start gaining? So at junior level or associate level, we generally look for, do you understand the design process? Do you have a design process? Do you have visual design skills or research skills? And we're happy to look at a case study that is not a real example of work. At mid-level, we're looking at the same thing, but we would want to see those things applied in a real context. And the thing that threw me the first time I went for a senior role was it wasn't necessarily about the work, the design work I was doing, but how I was helping my team or showing, making prioritization decisions and prioritizing work and things like that. So if you're considering how you prioritize work, that bumps you up to mid at least. So that's a core skill to try and show in your interviews. Cool. Does anyone have follow-up questions or anecdotes from interviews? You came off mic briefly.
I don't necessarily have one, but I think that explanation of the different levels of design is really good. It's one that always gets asked, and everyone's got a different opinion, but for the most part, I usually follow a similar path to what you just explained in terms of the different stages of your career. I think it's so popular now because some people go from being a complete junior to, say, a midway or even senior in some circumstances really quickly, and others do wonder how it's possible. And yeah, that explanation in itself kind of breaks down how it's possible. In some companies, I feel like some companies do give a lot of trust to their designers, and sometimes that allows them to experience a lot more quicker, and others just may not. But yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I imagine coming in at a junior position in a company that actually supports you and is prepared for those level of roles can help you progress much quicker than coming in as a junior or mid-level in an organization that doesn't. Like,
yeah, it kind of stagnates you for a bit.
Yeah,
it
it took
happened many
me,
times.
yeah, I slowly worked through. So I think, I can't think how many years it was. Maybe I got to mid-level in like 2 or 3 years, and then mid-level to senior was another maybe 2 or 3 years. But I do see some people now, processes are more defined in design, moving through those very quickly. But make sure you've got the support that you need as well.
100%
choice.
makes a huge difference.
I think that definition of the different levels came from like a Twitter chat feed. Maybe probably you started it. Like,
I'm sure I've done something along the lines, but yeah, to me it makes complete sense in my position. Like in, you know, how you've just mentioned, you had an experience where it took you 3 years to go from junior to mid, and then another 2 to 3 years. For me, I got fast tracked into a mid role, and then I kind of got fast tracked into a senior role really quickly. It all happened within 2.5 to 3 years. That being said, I was designing prior, but even then, like, it just shows you that some companies are willing to take an educated risk, I guess, or an educated bet, and try and integrate you with other great designers and get you up to speed really quickly. I know one of our designers recently, he's called Sam Cahalan. I believe he went into a job, and he's basically been fast tracked to at least mid-level design, simply because he's the startup's main designer at this point, or I believe maybe the lead designer.
Like head of design.
The design department from a product standpoint is Sam, yeah. And you know, I think it's a testament to even just how you explain the system, well, the different levels, because at this point the company trusts him to be able to, you know, assess design priorities and find you know, figure out what the biggest problems to solve are. And I think he's doing an amazing job. I believe he's just passed probation recently too, so it's just an example of how you can go into an organization and there's a lot of trust, and yeah, you know, your career doesn't necessarily have to take the most common path.
I'm thinking about what else might be useful to prepare for. So
there's a question in chat, Laurence, from Thamina.
Do interviewers still ask about UX trends or visual designs? I don't know necessarily. I haven't been asked about this, but I'm not going for those more visual tasks. So Zem might have a better idea, or anyone else who's been through this. I can see you talking, but
when I was last interviewing, so 2019, I believe, even then, no, they don't really ask you so much about they ask you how you keep up with trends, or that's at least what I had in my experience. How would you keep up with trends? How do you always ensure that your design skills or your design practices are of, you know, recent times, that sort of thing? I think that gets asked, but it depends. I guess it depends, like you said, it depends on the company. So some companies may not prioritize the visual side of design as much, and yeah, others might. It's I think every company in the space has their own process. So it's kind of hard to prepare for that question, apart from saying, you know, I follow amazing designers on X platform or Y platform. That
might be what their task is for. Like for me, because I've worked on basically a black and white website for like 7 years, they want me to do a task to show that I can do some visual design that doesn't look like a black and white website. And then I might freak out a little bit. Because I over design things. I'm like, what's the need for color here? So which led me to working on this black and white website, to be honest. So yeah, you might get a task to demonstrate those, but hopefully your case studies, you'd be able to demonstrate like up to date visual design, UX design stuff. Something I was reflecting on recently was an interview that wasn't very structured that I went to. They never asked for a resume to explain like how I met the essential skills and experience. And during the interview, they didn't ask me direct questions for those as well. So on reflection, I think for that job, I wish that on my case study that I talked through, I made sure I covered each of the essential criteria. So look at that list. That it's normally just a bullet pointed list, and try and send it to them as part of your CV at least, or cover letter. I think this is what I would do in reflection for that specific role, and not assume that they'll ask those questions during the interview. But if you get to that point, try and make sure you've covered them off. Because in most cases, if they're reviewing multiple candidates, they will be literally checking off like a scoring against those. So like a 0 to 3 score on each criteria, because if you've got 20 applicants, you need a fair way to make sure they've got all the right skills and experience. So yeah, read through the skills and experiences and make sure you've got an answer for each one if possible. Or a hypothetical. I got into my senior level role using a hypothetical answer. So what would I do in a certain situation? Because I hadn't been leading a team, or I hadn't been in positions where I had the power to make the changes that I'd need to as a senior. Cool. I think that's everything out of my head so far.
One question that has come up a couple of times for people going to startups, in fact, as I asked me it, is what's one thing I should know about you that I don't? So it's a question to just get you thinking off the hoof, what is it? Paris Stu had it, and she said that she translates poetry into, I can't remember what language it was. I said I'm 4'11", which I am. So yeah, so just think of something that you can say that doesn't sound rehearsed, but that's just a bit fun, that gives a bit of information into your personality.
Yeah, I think quite dry. So yeah, how can we bring some personality into this?
Yeah.
Is that something people are looking for in the interviews, do you think?
Well, I did just have a student on Friday she got through, she's invited for interview, but they said, just so we understand a bit more about you and your personality, can you send us a 3-minute video answering a couple of questions, but just so we understand your personality better? And it was brilliant. She did 2 truths and a lie, which I thought was a really good way to do it. So she left it with that, so they would come back to her to find out which the lie was, which I thought was like so inspired, fabulous.
I'm going to steal that.
I did that actually, a speech I did at Toastmasters. Yeah, it's a really good thing to do to get the audience engaged.
Yeah, we do it at the beginning of each cohort, which is like a cheesy icebreaker, but it gets us to know each other. So if you haven't done that in your group, maybe it's something you could do.
Maybe that's where she got the idea from. So who's got any other questions that they want Laurence to feed into? Even basic questions like, why do you want to work for the company? Or tell me about yourself, or salary expectations. Whilst we have him for the next 5 minutes to use his expertise, what other interview questions would you like to get clarification on how to answer? Feel free to take yourself off mute or put yourself into chat. Laurence, we've got one in chat from Femina. Why UX design?
I guess this is a relevant question if we were talking earlier about big tech companies cutting non-technical roles. Give me a second. Well, I kind of keep mentioning it. I sound like a broken record, but like without understanding your users' needs, how do you know that what your user experience is about de-risking the chance of spending months working on something that doesn't work? So that's why UX design for me. But other people go down the route of maybe a more empathetic route about talking about the users themselves. So do you believe that using a product should be frictionless, or yeah, etc. That's a really scary question. I'm not the expert in all of these answers, by the way.
It's so ominous.
Zai, what would you say then?
UX isn't everything. It's kind of to what Laurence said in terms of understanding users' needs. You know, if you don't understand users' needs, how can you create something that actually solves their purpose? I like to believe there's an element of UX design in just the experience of, for instance, right now, Love Circle in itself. You know, someone who's currently thinking of transitioning from wherever they've come from, you know, what's the optimal, or what could be an optimal learning experience? If it was just like, if we're thinking about just the base needs, it would be content. If we're thinking to go a step further than that, it's live content. Okay, you can't just have live content with anyone, because that would be like a supply teacher in school, which no one really learned from. So what do? We find the person who's got the expertise in that field. Great. We've got someone like Laurence, we've got someone like yourself, Jenny. And that already increases the experience tenfold from them just studying on a screen, you know, studying video content or written content on the screen. But how can we go further than that and really understand their pain points? Some people you know, one of the things is some people often have edge case questions or unique questions that only come up in an environment after some time. And who's going to be best at deal with those questions? It'll be yourselves. So how do we even incorporate one-to-ones or some sort of form of communication where someone who's currently learning can ask that question? We could say, yeah, have a form and, you know, do that, but like, it's a less intimate experience, and a more intimate experience gives confidence, and it also gives a lot more reassurance, because there's a level of empathy that can be shown through just verbal communication. Well, vocal community, yeah, I don't know words, but you get the point. Like, things like this, thoughts that we have to have, even like, you know, this is the UX experience of learning, and I think it's very imperative that, you know, companies have this sort of process when it comes to developing products or services, as the better they can get this down, the more likely that their the users or the people that they try to serve can solve their problem with that product or service. And that's what every company wants at the end of the day, because it makes them look good at their job. And I hope we look good at ours. But I guess that's how I look at UX, and that's why I'd suggest, you know, being a very important thing. UX transcends just visual design, by the way. And it's literally in everything that we do. Everything that we experience is designed. I guess it's, again, the answer in itself can sound somewhat like ominous or altruistic in some sense, but, you know, it's just so broad, and people need designers. And you know, we've currently seen, I don't know if anyone uses Twitter, but like, we've seen what happens when designs are kind of pushed, not from a design standpoint, but from a stakeholder who just wants to see some things happen. You know, some of the updates recently haven't really been design centered around what users need, but more so the business goals. And we could see that. And, you know, you can see people complain about the suboptimal experience of the platform in itself as of recent. Something, I guess Instagram did something similar recently, where they've done that, like, I don't know what the new notes feature is, but that's quite cool. But at the same time, who wanted that? But in their scenario, that might be them trying something completely new and trying to figure out if there's other use cases for their billions of users. And right now it looks positive. So it's like, these are just examples of how it affects ourselves in terms of products and also the learning experience. Sorry if I'm rambling. It's not even my space, it's Laurence's. I'm going to mute myself.
Made me think about like the things that they're cutting, which we might see more long-term effects, which will be interesting to pay attention to. Like,
yeah,
not really considering the harm that they could cause with certain features or the risks they're putting users under. And perhaps there was like a balance, because I've been on teams where we're considering everything and not delivering anything. We always need more research. I'm never confident, and that's just as bad as shipping things that are going to be harmful almost. Well,
Yeah.
not as bad, but you know,
Yeah.
it's not going to be sustainable. So I think that's probably what's one of the causes of like this current trend at the moment. But I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see the long-term effects on these products.
100%.
That leads me actually into promoting a session we have in March, a most amazing guest, designing for, let me just get the title right, for safety and integrity in social technologies. So Robbie Manson works for Meta, and basically he oversees like Facebook and WhatsApp, and designing to make sure that there isn't harmful content posted, if things are posted, how it can be taken down in a way that isn't negative for other people, the grief process if somebody passes on. Some people want to keep the account alive, other people don't. So he'd be a really amazing guest for you all to join and ask him questions about actually thinking about safety and integrity when it comes to the design process in social technologies and the future of that.
Great.
Lovely. So thank you so much, Laurence, for joining us today. Any questions, any other challenging interview questions, just feel free to message me, and we can see if we can get answers for you. And everybody, enjoy your afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
There you go.